Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Roger Drummer here with another HerbWorks podcast. And today's topic, the government is lying to you. Now, most people will say, I already know that. But what I want to talk about today is how much misinformation comes from the government on diet and dietary recommendations, on food in general, and about the drugs that we're told that we need to consume. You know, all of this comes back to regulations and politics, and I'm not talking about political parties. I'm talking about the politics of food companies, the politics of powerful manufacturers of different items, food items, things that you wouldn't really consider to be food items, and how they control the information that you get. And what is really wrong with all this information we've been getting? And really what I want to hone in on is the low-fat diet. So let's get started and talk a little bit about food and really this whole idea of low-fat, which has been around now, I think, for about at least 40 years. I think they started recommending a low-fat diet and low cholesterol in the early 60s. And so it's been around quite a long time. And basically what they figured out recently is that it's all a lie. And it's not that they just figured it out recently. They've actually known it in some cases for almost 40 years. And yet they went along with this line that low fat is actually good for you. Now, we know now from all the science that this whole low-fat movement in the United States for health, and it all had to do with your heart health. They thought that if you ate low-fat, you ate low cholesterol, that diet would be really good for your health. Well, heart disease has gone from the number 2 killer to the number 1 killer in this span of time of low-fat diet. And this is my beef when I mentioned drugs earlier. You know, think about, we have to start thinking about whether something works by just looking at the statistics. Now, look at the statistics for statin drugs. Statin drugs are designed to lower cholesterol. This was the whole idea, by the way, behind vegetable oil for heart disease and why we should switch to a low-fat diet with a lot of vegetable oil. Anyway, it was all to prevent heart disease. So we got introduced to statin drugs. Statin drugs sell anywhere from $20 to $40 billion worth a year. Wow, that's a lot of drugs. So in the time span of 30 years that these drugs have been on the market, heart disease has gone from the number 2 killer in America to the number 1 killer. Now, something tells me that that's not working, that lowering cholesterol is not the key to heart disease. Now, this is what you're going to find out today, and this is so fascinating to me because, again, it's about food, and food is one of the things I love to talk about, is that they now, in almost every study, and I'm talking about real studies, ones that were randomized controlled studies, where they actually used corn oil, vegetable oil in the study, because, again, why were we supposed to move toward that type of oil? Is because it lowered cholesterol. In almost every study it was ever used in, cholesterol went down and heart attacks went up. Now, it doesn't take a genius to ask, what's the point of that? Right? If your number of heart attacks goes up, and not just a little bit. In fact, in one of the biggest studies, the one that's considered a randomized controlled study that actually shows cause and effect, for every 20 points that the cholesterol went down, your chances of getting a heart attack went up 22%. Think about that. This whole cholesterol idea is just crazy to me anyway. And so, but I can guarantee you that for the next 25 years, even though the statistics are coming in and we should be changing our idea around cholesterol, that it will never make it down to your general practitioner doctor who will be giving you a prescription for a drug because That's how business rolls in the United States. So anyway, this whole low-fat diet thing that had absolutely no science behind it, that we've all jumped onto, and this bandwagon we got onto, the whole low-fat cholesterol thing, was actually based on rabbits. I'll let that sink in for a minute. The whole idea of consuming vegetable oil, lowering your cholesterol, and not consuming animal products that had cholesterol in it was based on rabbits that someone artificially stimulated cholesterol in. So they fed rabbits a meal that had a high amount of cholesterol in it, and their cholesterol went up. Now, this is very fascinating because rabbits don't eat anything with cholesterol in it. They're herbivores, meaning they eat plants to live. And so they fed them animal foods, and their cholesterol went up. Then they gave them vegetable oil, and it went back down. There you have it. That is the source of the entire movement in the United States and worldwide to move away from foods that have saturated fat and cholesterol in it and to move into using vegetable oils. And now, in that whole span of time that we've gone through, heart disease has just gone through the roof. Obesity is, I don't even have to tell you how many people are obese in this country. Diabetes, high blood pressure, all these things that are basically attributed to inflammation in your arteries, which is the number one thing that vegetable oils cause in your diet. Now that I mentioned that, if I could tell you one thing that you could do today that would drastically improve your health and your diet, is just throw away all your vegetable oil, except for maybe olive oil, if it's a good one. Now, olive oil is actually from a fruit because olives are a fruit, but olive oil is made by just squeezing olives and getting the oil out of it, as opposed to going through a long manufacturing process. And so there's some amazing nutritive qualities to olive oil that's actually been proven to be good for your heart. So using olive oil, as long as you don't cook with it, you should never cook with olive oil unless it's very, very low heat for a very short period of time, because you're going to damage the antioxidants and nutrients that are beneficial to you. So other than that oil, as a vegetable oil, don't use it. Just throw it out. Find something that is semi-safe to bake with if you have to bake. Do something, but don't consume these oils on a daily basis, and you will make a quantum leap in your health. And the amount of inflammation you have in your body will go down, and your health will improve. Now you throw in a few other things along the way, eating more real food, eating more clean food, removing inflammatory chemicals, you know the whole program. That will help you too. But today, if you're not doing anything else, just stop eating vegetable oil. So back to the rabbits. The most amazing thing about this was all started by a guy named Ancel Keys. And I don't want to give you the entire story on it because it's so long, but he got the entire country to just buy into his low cholesterol, low saturated fat idea after this study with rabbits. And it basically just took over America, even though there was actually no studies to back it up. In fact, the study that he submitted and showed to the entire world, he threw away at least half the data because it didn't match up with his study. Now, surprisingly, the very first and the best study that exists in the world that proves his entire theory wrong was done by him himself in Minnesota. And when they got the results, they didn't use it. They buried it for almost 40 years because they weren't excited about the data. Well, why is that? Because the data proved him completely wrong on his theory that saturated fat and cholesterol caused heart disease. And by the way, just so you know what this study is, it was a randomized controlled study showing cause and effect. That's the only ones you should pay attention to. Most studies are what they call cohort studies or correlation studies, meaning they just ask large groups of people over a long period of time what they ate, if they can remember what they ate, and to write it down and then just see if there's some statistics that stick out. Basically, the people always lie or can't remember what they actually ate, and so they're really based on nothing. Unless they show like a 40 to 50% increase in something, then it's something to pay attention to. But most of them don't. They're basically just giving you an idea about something you might want to do an actual study about. So, this one study that was actually done by Ansel Keys was called the Minnesota Coronary Survey. They had 9,000 mental patients. This is how it was actually a real study. They were all institutionalized. Nowadays, you couldn't do that study. It'd be illegal. But they were institutionalized so they could control their diet. They gave half of them saturated fat in their diet, butter, all these different things, and they gave the other half corn oil. And this is where they found out that every person that had a 20-point drop in their cholesterol ended up raising their chance of having a heart attack by 22%. They just did so poorly in that study. In fact, a large number of the men in the study actually died of heart disease. And so, but they ignored this because it didn't go along with their theory. And the movement had started in the United States to push vegetable oils and to push vegetable oil products. And, that's getting into, again, to the food companies, getting into the politics of profit. And so once that engine started rolling down the tracks, it was really hard to suppress it. And in fact, any scientist that came up with information that went against this basically was either blacklisted in some way. They couldn't get their research published. They were cut off from their university or their ability to do research. There was just a lot happened to these people that was all negative. And so none of this information actually came out.
This podcast is brought to you by Herbworks, specializing in stress and brain essentials. Check out Roger's other articles and videos at herbworks.com. While you're there, take a look at our natural herbal-based product line for energy, stress, immunity, and sleep. Now back to Roger.
Now, you might be wondering, well, how can we say that all these things are related to that? And basically, the information's coming out. And this is what's disturbing to me about the whole low-fat diet. And by the way, I am going to venture a guess that we will be seeing this low-fat diet pushed on us for another 20 years, even though the government itself has removed all dietary guidelines to cholesterol. Think about that. The government itself has removed their dietary guidelines on cholesterol. The last time they did it, they wanted you to eat 300 milligrams max a day, and now there's absolutely no limits on it. Eat away. Eat all the eggs you want. There's no limits to the amount of cholesterol because they know it has absolutely nothing to do with heart disease. Let me repeat that. Dietary cholesterol doesn't have anything to do with heart disease. By the way, I have to tell you a story. I was doing my own little test on cholesterol once. I went in and had a test done, and two things they told me. One, they told me I had amazing cholesterol. My cholesterol was 100. The other one was that they told me I had liver inflammation. They were wondering if I had hepatitis and wanted me to take another test. So I waited about a week because I knew I could go to this other kind of little seminar and get my cholesterol tested again. So I decided to run a little test in that week. And so for the next 7 days, I ate a dozen eggs a day for 7 days. In case you're doing the math, it's 84 eggs in 1 week. Went in and had my cholesterol tested and had the same test actually done. Nobody mentioned that I had liver inflammation this time. And they told me my cholesterol was 100. Wow. So basically it kind of showed me that eating cholesterol didn't affect my cholesterol a lot. And so, your body produces cholesterol when it actually needs it. But the interesting thing I found out was that people with cholesterol of 100 or around that area there have a greatly increased chance of having a stroke, the type of stroke that's completely debilitating, if they're over 60 years of age. Now, that wasn't my age at the time, but it was interesting to find out that there was a correlation, again, that word, between extremely low cholesterol and stroke brain injury. So right away I thought, I'm going to raise my cholesterol. Took me a long time to actually do that. In fact, it was a very long process of getting it up to 125 and then maybe getting up to 150. And then I switched my diet over in the last 4 years and to a more of a high-fat diet, and I've gotten it up to a really healthy level. And so, but the main thing that I'm doing this podcast about today is the fact that this disinformation that we've had around diet has led to a whole series of diseases in this country or disease states that are all let's say, directly related to the government's own recommendations about what we eat. In fact, the dietary guidelines have created the disease epidemic state that this country is in right now. If you look at all the diabetes, you look at all the obesity, you look at all the depressed people, depression has a lot to do with food intake. That's a proven fact. And a lot to do with the types of fat that you actually consume. Your brain is 60% fat. It needs fat. It needs essential fats. It needs omega-3 fatty acids. There's a lot of things that have to do with nutrition that comes through eating fatty foods that are really good for your brain. And if your brain doesn't get what it needs, it goes off. It's really hard. There's two things you have to pay attention to with your brain, especially if you feel like you're depressed. One's exercise, movement, and the other one's your diet. You have to look at your diet. If you had to throw another one in there, it's sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, those three things right there, if you're depressed or you're feeling a little blue and you don't know what to do, look at your diet. Look at whether you're moving your body. Look at whether you're sleeping right. Take care of those things. Wait a few months. See what's going on. You might be surprised at how differently you see life. So anyway, all these things, in fact, there's another one that's really nasty, one disease I didn't even mention, fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome. It's directly related to just eating carbohydrates and sugars, especially those with a lot of fructose. And you might be saying, well, I don't eat fructose. Well, table sugar is half fructose. Any sugar product's half fructose. So people eat fructose. But that's an entire disease that they now say affects a huge proportion of the people in this country. In fact, if you're kind of 30 pounds overweight and you got that tire that's sort of just kind of falling over your belt, you more than likely have non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome. And you need to radically change your diet to get rid of it. But that's a topic for another time. So all these guidelines that we've been given, and what's fascinating about this is most of the nutritional information that you get from the government or even from nutrition companies isn't actually based on anything. How many of you remember that we're supposed to drink 3 glasses of milk every day to build strong bones? There's no information that actually supports that. That's just a sales pitch by the dairy industry. Look at all the diets that have been pushed on us, and how it all comes back to variations of this low fat, no cholesterol diets, and how we get latched onto it because we are a country of diets. The government set us up with this no fat diet, and then we get all these other radical diets that we jump into, and practically none of them have any science behind them. But we jump right into it. Anybody remember the Fit for Life diet? I was on the Fit for Life diet for a while. Fit for Life was basically you eat 9 or 10 pieces of fruit before noon and nothing else. And it cleans your colon out, helps you lose weight. which is all true. It does clean you out because you can't eat that much fruit and not have bowel movements. So it does clean you out, but it also, for a lot of people, well, myself included, really messed with my blood sugar. And after a while, I got really imbalanced. I got really tired. I got cold. I had blood sugar issues. But again, because you're locked into this diet, you think that it's the best thing in the world for you, and there must be something wrong with you. You must be defective that you're having this reaction to this diet. And so it's hard to break away from these things. But I look back at that and think it was a great experience. I learned a lot, and I'll never actually do that again. And so, but we're a country that loves to get into diets. And, in this whole low-fat thing that the government put forward, everybody latched on to that. Everybody's paying attention to it. How many times have you gone to the store and bought low-fat yogurt? Well, low-fat yogurt is just something that they take some of the fat out and throw a whole bunch of sugar in it or some other carb, and all of a sudden you got something that just raises your blood sugar and makes you unhealthy. There's nothing healthy about low-fat yogurt. Nothing. And so it's amazing to me, though, to find out, because here I am. I'm somebody that's been in the health field since 1980. So in 1981, I got into the health field, started managing health food stores, became an herbalist. All these things progressed over so many years since then. And the reality is that I've fallen for most of these diets for a period of time. And I've been through almost every phase of dieting that exists in America, and I've tried them all just to see how they affect my body. And I can honestly tell you, I have never felt better or had better results on a diet that was basically a diet that allowed me to eat saturated fat, cholesterol, and high levels of other fats. And by cutting out carbohydrates, I probably feel the best I've ever felt in my entire life. And I think that my blood tests kind of show that I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life too. And so this is all on a diet that's completely opposite of what the government has been telling us for years to actually do. So this is one of the reasons behind this podcast today, is not to preach to you about the government lying to you, but to open up the way that you are thinking about food. Okay? One of the things I learned when I had chronic fatigue, and by the way, when I had chronic fatigue, I was on a diet that was very low in fat, very low in cholesterol, had a lot of carbohydrates in it, rices and different things like that, breads, whole grain breads, a lot of carbs, and hardly any animal protein at all. In fact, I ate eggs once in a while. Sometimes I go a year without them. And I was exercising a lot, and basically that diet contributed to my chronic fatigue. It just was not replenishing enough for me or muscle building enough for me. But I was locked into it because the information going through the health food stores and the whole health community at that time was consume all the carbohydrates you want. It's good for energy, and stay away from fat. Don't eat animal fat. Eggs are bad for you. Eat low-fat yogurt, all these different things. And so I ended up with chronic fatigue. And the big lesson I got out of that was not to be so restrictive with my food. And I think that's something that even applies today, even though I'm on a very specific diet now that's high fat. It's called the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet in general is kind of restrictive, mainly because people that get into it aren't foodies. In other words, they don't know the wide variety of food that's actually available to you. But I'm on this diet because of a medical issue, and I don't find it to be that restrictive at all. I'm not consuming any grains. I have wide interest in taste, so I have a lot of different foods. My wife has a garden. I grow all kinds of herbs. So I have all these options with eating my food. And so, back to my lesson. The lesson I learned back when I had chronic fatigue was not to be so restrictive, because when you get locked into this mindset that you can't ever have a carbohydrate, or you can't have a pizza, or you can't have this or that 100% of the time, instead of being relaxed about it and enjoying it once in a while, that has a stress on your system that may be as bad as the food that you're avoiding might have an effect on your system. So think about that. Anyway, that's a lesson that I learned. I remember when I had chronic fatigue and I started eating pizza once a week. I actually felt much better. I had a lot more energy because I needed the fat. I was on such a low-fat diet. But this whole idea of low carb, we think this is a big hot issue today. People are into low carb. It's actually been around since about 1860. In fact, there was research around the 1900s that actually showed that you could control diabetes and obesity by going on a low-carb diet. Now, why didn't that research stick around? Well, probably because of advertising, because the cereal companies got popular at that time and started pushing whole grain breakfast and all these different foods on everybody, and we got more into processed foods as time went by, and everything just kind of fell by the wayside. This whole vegetable oil thing took off. It was easier to do than butter. It was easier to do than lard, all these different things. But they knew back then that you could control your weight by controlling your carbohydrates. They didn't know why. They didn't realize it had to do with controlling your hormones. And the main hormone you control with it is insulin, which is the hormone that really determines how much you hold on to and how fat you get. And so all this information was pretty much suppressed. And we've fallen into this low-fat idea about health. And so what I want you to do today is just to start thinking about your diet and stop thinking about or demonizing fat and look at all the different amazing fats that you could put in your diet. Raw nut butters, you could eat more eggs, olive oil. If you like meat, just find a really good source for it and eat clean. This is my thing today. I've been through every diet known to man. And if I have to tell anybody how to eat today, I would tell them to eat clean. And if you want to change your diet, look into the paleo diet, right? Now, I've never fully been on a paleo diet, although you could say that the ketogenic diet is just a stricter paleo diet. But the reason I say that is because at least the paleo diet is based on eating real food. Now, I don't know if I agree that every single thing that they suggest was only eaten by our ancestors, and I think that's just a point that doesn't mean much to me. I don't care if our ancestors ate it, if it's a healthy food and it's low carb and it fits into the diet. And a lot of people are kind of relaxing their standards around it. But the problem with the paleo diet is most people that get into it actually think that it's just a high meat diet, that they can just eat meat all day, and that's really not what the diet's about. Although I'm not saying that's bad for you. But the reality is that the paleo diet is based on having some animal protein, having some nutrients that come from animals, because there are some specific ones that are only good for you that come from animals, like the DHA in fish oil or in fish, wild salmon, that type of thing. But it's based on clean food. And the average person that I'm giving dietary recommendations to is not eating clean food. They're not eating real food. They're eating a lot of white processed flour products. They're eating a lot of products out of boxes. They're going to fast food joints. They're not eating vegetables. And so if you can get someone to shift to a paleo diet, at least it's a diet that they can find an incredible amount of information on, because it's all over the internet. You can get books on it. They'll be eating whole foods. They won't be eating very much grain at all, which means that they'll be regulating their blood sugar. And this is the number one objective to any diet, is regulating your blood sugar, right? So if you can do that, regulate your blood sugar, and then what happens is that you'll actually lose weight. You'll actually be able to avoid almost every chronic illness known to man, because they're all related to the inflammation caused by high or unregulated blood sugar and insulin resistance. So all those things you can make a great impact on it just by paying attention to a paleo diet. Now, I did mention earlier that I'm on a ketogenic diet, and I actually think that's just a diet that is a variance of paleo. It's just a little stricter. They limit your carbs a little bit more. But again, I'm on that for a medical issue, which was cancer that I was able to cure with that diet. and a few other things that I did along with it, the herb products that I was on. But if you're out there and you're thinking about changing your diet, this is why I tell people to go on the paleo. It's a little bit easier. I don't know if you need to do ketogenic for the average person. It's a little too strict. But for a medical issue, it's an amazing diet. But start looking at and paying attention to eating clean food. Because I'll tell you right now, who can you trust for information or science for food? Practically no one. Because almost all the information that's out there about food is actually wrong. Almost all the information that you think is real scientific information is actually put out or paid for by food companies, and they're all pushing their agenda. And so it doesn't matter if it's the government or if it's even nutritional companies. It's all pushing an agenda, and we're the ones that lose. Think about this. I'll say this one more time. Non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, which they now estimate has close to 70 million people suffering from that worldwide, is all the result of misinformation that's been put out by the government and nutrition companies about what you should be eating and what you should be avoiding. Think about that. That's a illness or a disease that kills people and causes many, many other medical problems to develop along with it. It's not just, it never really happens by itself. It's something that leads into obesity, could be leading into diabetes. It could be leading into heart disease, all these different things. And what is it again? It's something that's caused by misinformation and overconsumption of foods that nutrition and the government has been pushing on you for the last 40 to 50 years. Have you ever consumed an egg white omelet? I mean, I laugh when I see these things on the menu. This whole push of egg white omelets, and you'll see it in restaurants that cater a lot to bodybuilders, people that work out. They actually think they're doing something good for their health by eating an egg white omelet. I mean, I just want to gag when I even see it on a menu. And you're actually talking to someone who probably eats on average at least 21 eggs a week. And I have for, can't even remember when I didn't eat that many eggs in the last 10 years. So, and my cholesterol is fine, by the way. My HDL is around 100. That's a good cholesterol. And my LDL is around the same number. So my cholesterol is right around 200. And whenever I have it checked by a doctor, they'll tell me I gotta lower that cholesterol, watch it. And I don't pay any attention to it at all. I've actually had a scan of all my arteries, and I have absolutely no blockage at all. So think about that. If you're worried about your cholesterol or you're worried about your arteries, you should have a picture taken of it. You should do an MRI or a scan and find out if you have a problem or not anyway, instead of just looking at a random number. I mean, there is good numbers of cholesterol you should strive for, and one's having high HDL, but the rest is really just kind of something made up by drug companies and the government. And again, they just removed all the dietary guidelines for consuming cholesterol. What does that tell you? They've been wrong for the last 40 to 50 years. And so keep that in mind. But back to egg white omelets, the greatest thing about that is just recently there was a study done on absorbing protein. And what they found out was that when you consume an egg white omelet or an egg white protein, you actually only absorb about half the amount of the protein in it because you need the egg yolks to have a synergistic effect with the egg white protein to absorb it all. I found that really fascinating. Got a good laugh out of it. I can't imagine suffering through an egg white omelet. By the way, I have to tell you this. My daughters love to bake, and one time they made something where they just needed a lot of egg whites, and so I ended up with 8 egg yolks. And so I didn't want to throw them out because they were organic eggs, and they were really those big yellow, just like sunshine, balls of sunshine, And so I ended up making a 10 egg yolk omelet. And I gave a little bit to my daughter, and we thought that was the best omelet I ever ate in my life. So think about that. 10 yolks and 2 whites put together into an omelet, and I threw a little cheese in it just to make sure it tasted good. But it was awesome, I have to tell you. In fact, I remember that omelet. It's been years and years and years. But anyway, they changed the recommendations for cholesterol. There was no press release. They just changed it on their website. There was a couple of newspapers that picked it up, but in general, they didn't really want to say anything because saying something would have been admitting that they made a mistake. They'd rather have you kind of maybe discover this 10 or 12 years from now and then wonder what actually happened. So this is what's going on in health and nutrition today. You can't really rely too much on anything you read that's a large press release, because more than likely if you look to the back of that press release to find out information, it doesn't matter if it's on diet, it's on heart disease, cholesterol, it's on organic farming or regular farming, whatever it is, look at the companies that are promoting the article, and you're more than likely going to find some food company or some company like Monsanto or somebody else that's pushing an agenda, and we're also expected to just fall in line like lemmings going over a cliff and follow their advice. And believe me, if you look at what's gone on in this country in the last 50 years, that advice is not worth following. So my word of advice to you as I wrap up this call is that the best thing you can do as far as diet is to eat clean food. And by clean food, I mean food that's lightly processed, food that is not sprayed with a lot of chemicals, so organic is always best. Limit your amount of grain or flour products and avoid vegetable oil like the plague. And if you want to find out some really great information and have a really fun time reading it, there's a book that I suggest that you buy, and you can get it on Amazon, like you can get almost anything on Amazon. It's called The Big Fat Surprise: Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. It's by Nina T. Schultz, and I probably mispronounced her name because that's what I do. But it's called The Big Fat Surprise. It's easy to find. And, you know, I know it'll ruffle some feathers out there. And I want to say one last thing, which will probably crack everybody up who's listening to this, is that I was a vegetarian for almost 30 years. And right now I'm a pescatarian. So I eat a little bit of fish and mostly a vegetarian diet. But I've never been one to push my diet ideas on somebody. I eat a certain diet because of my lifestyle and my spiritual practice, but I also can see that there's healthy benefits to all types of foods and healthy benefits to all types of diet. So find one that works for you. Don't be scared of saturated fat. Don't be scared of eggs and cholesterol. And eat clean, my friends. This is Roger Drummer. Thanks for tuning in to the HerbWorks podcast. And if you want more information, go to herbworks.com.